So, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Professor. Here's my presentation about cores and capitals. I hope you're having a fine afternoon because right now it's in the evening when I'm recording this. So, there are two important areas for the political geography of a state. So, there's the core areas, which are the center areas, which is not to be confused with the capital city, even though a lot of capital cities are in a core, and a lot of cores have capitals in them. So I hope this presentation can help you distinguish between those two things. So what is a core area? A core area. So the core area is usually the economic, population, and cultural center of the state. Could be one, could be two, as long as it is a center. And these core areas tend to have high population densities and high populations in general. So a lot of people live in the cores, but not a lot of people live in the peripheries. And most early nation states in the topic of formation of states grew from core areas, and then they expanded outwards. They expanded their frontiers. An example of this would be Russia, where their core area was the Moscow area, then they expanded outward into Siberia. And it's the same with China, like the core area of the basins around the river, then they expanded outwards to the areas of Xinjiang and Tibet. And core areas are usually in areas that is geographically advantageous, like rivers where transportation is easy, irrigation is easy, and coasts where trade with the outside world is also easy, or like coastal floodplains where irrigation and most importantly agriculture can support a high population for that core area. So, cores are differentiated from peripheries, as peripheries have less factories, they have less population, they have less economic output since most of them are agricultural, and yeah, they're not really manufacturing based economies, and they also have smaller towns and cities. And most of the time, the natural resources in the peripheries are taken to the core to be processed in its factories and to be processed by its population. So here's some extreme examples of periphery areas. Siberia and Russia, where not a lot of people live since it is really cold. The Amazon rainforest, not a lot of people live there. Economic output is kind of low. There's not much going on in this area. And Tibet and China, since it's very mountainous, which also contributes to the separatism in the region, it's hard to control. But economic output and other output is not really high since it's not a core area, it's a periphery. We'll see here in the population density map that right around here, here's the core area of China. Here are the cities, the Beijing, Shanghai, Nanjing. The red areas here are high population areas, but Tibet right here, well, there's really not a lot of people. It's kind of white since it is a mountainous area, so that's what makes it a periphery. And here in Siberia and Russia, Moscow is the core area, and it has the highest amount of population. But if you look right here to the right area, which is Siberia, or to the east, that's a huge swath of land which no one really lives in, since it's all white area here, since it is boreal forest. So it's a periphery. So examples of cores instead are the Tokyo area in Japan, the Jakarta area or the Java Island in Indonesia, and then the Paris area in France. So a core is most of the time it is the an economic center of the country. It has high economic output, it has high GDP compared to the periphery, and it usually contains the majority of the industry like factories and the headquarters of companies. So we can see in the right image that is the factories in the core area of the Philippines in Manila, and those high-rise buildings are found in Makati, also in Manila, the core area of the Philippines. So core areas like the one in the Philippines have higher GDPs. You can see right here the rank 1 region of the Philippines with the highest GDP with 37.5%, more than one-third of the entire country's entire GDP is just in this really tight city of Manila, and and the next provinces are the next regions with the highest GDPs are consequently the ones right next to Manila, with Calabarzon, my home region right here, with for representing 14.8% of national GDP, and Central Luzon with 9.3%. So it is the core area, the national capital region area, and the areas around it is the core of the Philippines, since it is the economic center of the Philippines. And of course, it's not Bangsamoro or Caraga, where they only represent 0.7% and 1.1% of the national GDP. So these are periphery areas. And another way you can tell an area is a core or is a periphery if you look at the lights in Google Earth. So in the left image, this is this is the Amazon rainforest, which is kind of dark since not a lot of economic output really happens here. Not a lot of businesses are here. Factories are not built here since it is a forest. And you compare that to the south of Brazil, where the lights are all here. It's kind of bright even at night, with the cities of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro or Janeiro. Mostly these areas are the ones with a high economic output, since you can even see how bright they are compared to the dark Amazon rainforest. So you can also see that in core areas, GDP per capita, or like the economic output per person, which is kind of a measurement how rich each citizen is, but it's kind of skewed by billionaires, but that's beside the point. You can see that Java has the darker colored blue, since they have the high GDP per capita compared to the rest of lightly colored Indonesia, the outer peripheries, the outer islands. They don't have high GDP per capita. They don't have a lot of economic output. So core areas are also importantly population centers and with high population densities. They are usually in cities and urban areas around cities. They have high population densities, which enables the economies of scale, and a lot of more people live in the core areas than in the periphery. So one example of a core area with a high population is Luzon, where 57% of all Filipinos actually live in Luzon. It's the largest island. And the peripheries, where we are in Visayas, 23% live in Visayas, and only 20% live in Mindanao, even though it's the second largest island. So that's why Luzon is the core, because most people live here, a majority, in fact, 57% is majority. And another extreme is also our neighbor in Indonesia. This is really extreme, since if you look at the other islands in Indonesia, this is like pure white. Almost no one lives in these islands, and almost all of them are I, no one lives in this. A lot of people live there, but compared to Java, not a lot of people, since almost all the blue colors are concentrated in Java Island, because this is the core area. And we want to know why cores are where they are. So cores are where they are since cores tend to spring up in the areas best suited for human settlements, like the areas which is suited for agriculture, like in China, where the agriculturally rich areas are the core, and the periphery are the mountainous areas like Tibet I showed there earlier, and areas which are suited for trade, like coastal areas where you can put your manufacture in the container ships and ship it to wherever you want to ship it, and other geographic characteristics. So let's see here. The core areas of Japan is Tokyo, and the core area of South Korea is Seoul. You want to know why these are the core areas and why people are so densely packed in these areas is because all the other areas are pretty much mountainous, and these are the only flatlands in their country, since their country is really full of mountains. You want to see it in the right image, the Kanto Plain. You see that lightly colored area over there, that's Tokyo. In the dark colored areas, those are the mountains. So no one wants to live in the mountains. That's why they are packed in densely populated cities, and that's why those cities become the cores. Another extreme example, very extreme example, is the Egyptian core, which is the Nile River. The Nile River. all these deserts, all these white areas right here is still part of Egypt, but no one lives there since no one wants to live in the desert. How can you find food to eat? Where can you find your job? How can you farm? So everyone actually lives in the green areas you can see right here on Google Maps. The green areas around the Nile River is the core of Egypt since everyone wants to live in the agriculturally productive area. So the fastest way to know what a country's core is and what its periphery is just by looking at it at night in Google Earth, which I will show in a video at the end of the PowerPoint. And because the brightest areas are usually the cores, and then the areas which don't have a lot of light, those are usually the periphery areas. So there are two types of countries. There's multi-cored and single-cored states. Single core states, yeah, from the name you can tell only have one core. Multi-core states, from the name you can tell, have more than one core. In single-core states, all the political, not the political, the economic, the population center is all concentrated into one area, while in multi-core states, it is still concentrated but into many areas and many cores. So an example of that is Vietnam, which has two cores, which hugs its two rivers, the Red River here and the Mekong River or Mekong River. And the Red River has Hanoi, the Hanoi area, and the Mekong River has formerly Saigon, but now it's called Ho Chi Minh City. You see right here, Vietnam has two cores. It doesn't mean that its population is dispersed or scattered. It means that it is concentrated into two areas. So you can see right here the high population density area of Hanoi area, and then the high population density of Ho Chi Minh City, since it is close to the river. It's also another example of the geographic characteristics of an area making it suitable to be a core. And some countries also have many different cores, which is kind of problematic, like in the case of Nigeria, where they have different really tribes and really tribal affiliations, and especially different religions. In the north, we have the Hausa and Fulani, which are mostly Muslim people. In the southwest, we have the Yoruba, the Christians. Over here in around the southern part of Nigeria are mostly Christians. And they also have divided cores. You have the Kano area in the north, which is the core, which is the part where Muslims are more dominant. And in the southern areas, you got Lagos, then you got Benin City, you got Port Harcourt, I can't pronounce Nigerian names. And because of this, actually, fun fact, they moved their capital to Abuja, Abuja territory. Right here, I'm pointing it with my mouse. Abuja territory to be more neutral between its different religions and different ethnicities, different cores. So the geopolitical implications, of course. So I have different videos prepared here, which can help us understand what happens, how the location of the core can really relate to the geopolitics of a state.
Japan is a mountainous, volcanic island chain located in the western Pacific Ocean. The islands arc from Russia in the north towards the Korean Peninsula in the south. The country has four main islands: Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu, and thousands of minor ones extending through the Ryukyu island chain, framing the East China Sea. Japan's rugged terrain and lack of interregional connecting rivers isolated its population into separate, densely populated coastal plains. The Yamato Plain, which dominates the inland sea, was the birthplace of Japanese civilization. This inland sea saw the rise of early Japanese maritime culture and facilitated communication and political control. As Japanese culture expanded over the island chain, the seat of power moved to the more productive and strategically located Kanto Plain, Japan's core region and home to Tokyo, the world's largest metropolitan area. The country's primary geographic challenge is sustaining its large population on an island with little arable land and few natural resources. Japan's geography has prompted the country to alternate between periods of isolation and expansion. When Japan unifies under strong centralized control, it is often drawn towards the continent for resources and land. This happened in the late 1500s and again in the early 1900s, leading to World War II. Given its location, the Korean peninsula has been the corridor of invasion between Japan and China, and its status remains of strategic importance to Tokyo. The lack of natural resources in Japan continues to force Tokyo to seek them abroad, leaving the country to balance between US naval dominance and Chinese expanding maritime interests.
Vietnam is located on the easternmost edge of the Indo-Chinese peninsula, with China to the north and Laos and Cambodia to the west. Its more than 2,000-mile-long coastline abuts the Gulf of Tonkin, the South China Sea, and the Gulf of Thailand. These seas create both direct access to the wider Pacific Ocean and a critical buffer to Vietnam's long and narrow land territory. Modern Vietnam consists of two geographic and population cores: the Red River Delta in the north, home to the capital of Hanoi, and the Mekong River Delta in the southern lowlands, where Ho Chi Minh City sits. These cores are separated by over 1,600 miles and connected by a thin and largely mountainous coastal spine, only around 30 miles wide at its narrowest point. Despite mountains and jungles, the northern Vietnamese core has a long history of invasion by forces from China. This almost continuous pressure from the north in part forced Vietnam's early rulers to expand the country's boundaries. First southward to the Mekong River Delta, and then westward into present-day Laos and Cambodia. Historically, and today, the natural geographic separation of Vietnam's northern and southern cores has exacerbated the two regions' social, cultural, and political divide, leaving the country vulnerable to invasion by foreign powers, whether Chinese, French, or American. Vietnam's primary geographic challenge is to secure buffer space, both on land and sea. Today, Vietnam's need for space and security in the South China Seas pits it against China, also in the throes of maritime expansion, thus adding a new dimension to Vietnam's long-standing struggle to carve space for itself against its larger northern neighbor. Vietnam is located on the easternmost edge.
Located in the northeast corner of Africa, Egypt lies at the heart of the Arab world. Comprised of mostly uninhabitable desert, 99% of the country's 83 million people live along the banks of the Nile River. This region, from the Aswan High Dam to the Mediterranean shore, is Egypt's core. The Nile, while not commercially navigable, forms the basis of Egypt's irrigation-dependent agricultural sector. The long, narrow stretch of population requires expensive infrastructure development, especially related to transportation, straining the capital-poor government's resources. The desert topography demands a great deal of investment on a national scale, necessitating a strong central state, helping to explain Egypt's history of authoritarian regimes, beginning with the pharaohs. Egypt's main geographic challenge has been to develop beyond the narrow Nile corridor and project power eastward. The Saharan desert has largely insulated the Nile core from its western flank and contained Egypt's westward expansion. Egypt has been able to translate its strong central government and border with Israel into developing a relationship with the United States, the key foreign backer protecting the Suez Canal and the northern coastline. This area contains the majority of Egypt's offshore hydrocarbon reserves. The Sinai Desert has traditionally been the overland route of foreign invasion, but its more manageable geography also accommodates Egyptian attempts to interact with the Levant and Arabian Peninsula, and competition with Saudi Arabia for the role of regional Arab hegemon. Located in
The West African country of Nigeria is bordered by Benin, Niger, Chad, Cameroon, and the Gulf of Guinea. Nigeria gained its independence from Great Britain in 1960. A series of mountains form the country's eastern border. Two rivers, the Niger and the Benue, effectively form a boundary between northern, southwestern, and southeastern Nigeria. The northern half of the country is largely savanna grassland, supportive of pastoral agriculture. Highlands in the south produce cash crops like oil palms and rubber. Most of Nigeria's regions have arable lands that allow the country to support Africa's largest population of 150 million people. Each region has a dominant ethnic group. The Hausa Fulani are based in the north, the Yoruba in the southwest, and the Igbo in the southeast. These and more than 250 other ethnicities all vie for control over the Niger Delta region because of its abundant reserves of oil and natural gas. The Niger Delta region itself is home to the Ija people, who have exerted disproportionate influence over the country's politics, as seen with the election of Goodluck Jonathan as president in 2011. Nigeria's capital, Abuja, was intentionally located in the country's center to promote its neutrality. Managing the competition for natural resources between these ethnically divided regions is Nigeria's primary geographic challenge. Looking ahead, Nigeria will have to settle its internal ethnic division and astutely manage its oil revenue to deal with its projected population of 390 million people by 2050.
Malaysia straddles Southeast Asia's key geopolitical divide between the mainland and the archipelago. Peninsular Malaysia occupies the southernmost tip of Southeast Asia's Malay Peninsula. East Malaysia, however, is on the island of Borneo, over 600 kilometers away across the South China Sea. Peninsular Malaysia is defined by north-south mountain ranges flanked by coastal lowlands. The nation's core is its west coast from Penang to Johor Bahru, including the capital, Kuala Lumpur. This coastline fronts major east-west trade routes through the Malacca Strait, whose shores are divided between Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore. Malaysia's primary geographic challenge is to secure this coastline in order to extract revenue from east-west trade. Today, Malaysia's substantial manufacturing center is concentrated in this core region. Johor Bahru also benefits from proximity to Singapore, which left Malaysia in 1965. Malaysia's ethnic minority Indian and Chinese communities are also concentrated in the core, comprising 30% of the population. These groups wield outsized economic power and form the basis of the political opposition. Their population growth is slower than the ethnic Malay majority, creating an increasingly volatile political environment. East Malaysia makes up 60% of the country's landmass, but has only 20% of the population. This sparse population is tipped toward the ethnic Malays and is growing in electoral significance. East Malaysia is playing a growing role in energy production, key to sustaining the country's decades of steady economic growth. Borneo also fronts the South China Sea, where Malaysia's maritime claims overlap with the claims of the Philippines, Brunei, Vietnam, and China. As Borneo's offshore fields become more important to Malaysia, the nation's South China Sea claims could bring it into conflict.
The Philippines is a collection of over 7,000 islands situated at the confluence of the South China Sea, the Indonesian archipelago, the Philippine Sea, and Pacific Ocean. It forms the outer edge of maritime Southeast Asia, and for much of its modern history has served as a gateway between Western powers and continental Asia. A former colony of both Spain and the United States, the Philippines today consists of 3 island clusters: Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Luzon, with the country's capital in Manila, is the political, cultural, and economic core of modern Philippines. It is highly urbanized relative to the rest of the country, boasts a large port and deep harbor, and accounts for roughly 1/3 of the Philippines' GDP. Mindanao has long been a hotbed for political unrest and insurgent movements and is populated by the predominantly Muslim Moro tribes. It is also an important fruit and produce exporter. The Philippines is shaped by sharp geographic, economic, and social divisions between a primarily urban north in Luzon and a heavily agricultural, poorer south. This, along with the fractured island geography, makes effective national integration difficult. It also undermines Manila's efforts to play a stronger role throughout the South China Sea region, or guard against external infringement on its territorial waters, especially from China. That weakness is apparent today as China's increasingly aggressive moves to assert its own maritime claims test Manila's voice in groups like ASEAN, as well as its alliance with the US. While the Philippines' location at the entrance to maritime Southeast Asia makes it geopolitically significant, internal imbalances continue to hamper its ability to actively defend its own claims, let alone project power.
So that was the presentation on the geopolitical significance of the course, but now let us move on to capitals. So everyone knows it's gonna be short. Capital cities are where the government is located. The capital of the Philippines is Manila, like the capital of Japan is Tokyo. But the main takeaway you should know is that most capitals may be located in cores, but not all of them. Some capitals are not in a core because of political and economic reasons. And these capitals which are not in the core area of the country are called forward capitals. So to be short, not all cores have capitals in them, and not all capitals are inside cores. So an example of that would be Brasilia, the new capital of Brazil, which replaced Rio de Janeiro in 1960. It was built inland in the inland part of Brazil to better integrate the country and to escape like the crowded area that was Rio de Janeiro. So you can see the high population density parts of Brazil is here in Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, but the capital is right here in Brasilia, this tiny blue area. That's the capital. So this is an example of a political reason why the capital is outside the core. Another one is Canberra. Canberra was chosen as the capital because there were two cities in Australia who wanted to become the capital city. That was Melbourne and Sydney. So as a compromise within the two, since they both wanted to be to be the capital, let's just choose a part of the country which was between the two of them, and that was Canberra. Then they built Canberra from the ground up as the capital city, and you can see that that's the little light right here in this Sydney, this is Melbourne. You can see that Canberra is in the middle of them. And another capital which is born of political reason is Washington D.C. You know, everyone knows New York, which is like the cultural and economic center of the USA, but the capital is in Washington D.C. And the reason for that because it was a compromise for Congress between the southern slave-owning states led by Mr. Thomas Jefferson or President Thomas Jefferson and the northern states which was led by Alexander Hamilton. So lastly, I'm gonna show you my video of me explaining how you can tell a country's course from its peripheries using three methods. So go. So, hello, welcome to my report again. Titingin po tayo ng mapa dahil ito ang gusto kong kadalasan gawin. So, ngayon, titingin po tayo yung course and capital. So, ano nga ba natutunan natin na ano nga ba isang core? Diba sabi nga sa aking presentation ay ang core, ito yung cultural at economic center at most importantly, population center ng isang bansa. So, para malaman natin kung asan yung core ng isang bansa, tingnan natin yung population density. Since doon natin malalaman kung saan nagsisiksikan yung mga tao. So, unang-una, tingnan natin po itong Pilipinas. Ano ba yung kulay ng buong Pilipinas? Kadalasan ng kulay nito ng mga malalayong probinsya ay kulay puti. So, ibig sabihin, wala masyadong katao-tao doon. Yun yung periphery. Pero kung titingnan mo saan ba nagsisiksikan ang karamihan ng Pilipino? Saan ba kulay pula yung population density map? At makikita mo yun, which is ito yung Central Luzon region, Calabarzon region, at nakasurround sila sa Maynila. So, masasabi natin, ito yung core ng Pilipinas. So, obvious naman siya since bakit ba nagsisiksikan yung mga tao dito? So, kung titingnan natin sa mapa, nagsisisikan yung mga tao dito dahil dito yung flat na lugar at ito yung sakto na gitnang-gitna ng Luzon. Hindi ka makakapunta galing sa Bicol papuntang Ilocos, sabihin natin, na hindi ka dumadaan ng Maynila. So, strategic yung location niya. Kung ayaw mo dumaan ng Maynila, literal na lalangoy ka ng dagat at aakit ka ng bundok. So, dadaan ka dito sa Pacific Ocean o aakitin mo yung Sierra Madre. So, kaya ito yung core ng Pilipinas. At dahil ito nga, katabing-katabi niya yung flat area na to, nandito nang gagaling lahat ng pagkain na susupply sa Manila. Siya yung strategic positioning. At isa pang method na malalaman natin na ito yung core ng Pilipinas ay tingnan lang natin yung Pilipinas sa gabi. Makikita yung Pilipinas, karamihan ng Pilipinas ay madilim dahil wala masyadong economic activity na nangyayari dito. Ito sa Southern Leyte, wala masyadong nangyayari dito sa lugar na ano ko. Kung mapapansin nyo, parang yung buong Pilipinas ay may isang malaking ilaw lang. So, ito yung core. So, yung easy way para malaman kung ano yung core ng bansa. Tinan mo kung saan umiilaw. At ito yung pinakamalaking ilaw. Ito yung core. Tapos, at the rest ng mga madidilim na parte, yun yung periphery ng core. So, parang using that method na tingnan natin ano yung pinakamailaw na lugar at tingnan naman natin yung mga kalapit nating bansa sa Southeast Asia. So, sa Thailand, saan ba yung pinakamailaw na yung lugar? Bingo, ayan, itong gitna, Bangkok, yan yung core nila. Malaysia naman, ito, walang katao-tao dito, medyo madilim sa Eastern Malaysia. At sa Western Malaysia naman, itong peninsular na parte, mailaw dito sa western part, dito sa Western Coast part, ito yung nila, core area. Nandito yung center ng economic activity, kaya mailaw. Sa Vietnam naman, nakita sa PowerPoint kanina, dalawa yung core nila. Ito yung Red River Delta. So, ito yung Hanoi City. Tapos ito naman Ho Chi Minh City. Ilaw pa lang, malalaman mo na ito yung core nila. Tingnan natin sa Indonesia. Kita sa Indonesia. Napakadilim ng buong Indonesia. Walang kailaw-ilaw dito. Paano kaya sila nakakita? Tapos sa eastern ng Jakarta, na ito yung core nila, yung nakikita nila, sobrang liwanag. So, ito yung core nila. So, pwede mo din gamitin itong method na to tinan mo as yung mailaw para malaman kung multi-core ba yung bansa na tinitingnan mo o isa lang yung core nila. So, punta tayo sa isang extreme example na isa lang yung core na bansa, which is yung Egypt. Kung makikita mo paggabi sa Egypt, halos lahat ng ilaw ay nandito sa isang area lang, concentrated sa Nile River. Pero itong parte na to, itong desierto na to, Egypt pa rin to, wala lang talaga nakatira doon. So, kaya siya peripheral areas. Tinaman natin. Dito sa Europe, punta tayo Europe. Isa lang yung core ng France. Isa lang yung core ng France. Kasi makikita mo, may isang malaking ilaw. Tapos yung ibang ilaw, the rest ng mga ilaw, maliliit na lang. Pero kung tinaman natin, sabihin natin yung Amerika, kasi multi-core na bansa ito, hindi mo masasabi na isa lang yung isang malaking ilaw lang pinandito sa Amerika since marami nga po sila dito. Merong mailaw dito parte sa northeastern part, sa may New York, Boston, Philadelphia, mailaw din dito sa Texas area, mailaw din dito sa California, dito sa sa San Francisco, may Golden State Warriors diyan. At may ilaw din dito sa sa Detroit. So, multi-core area ang USA since marami siyang ilaw. Marami siyang center ng ekonomiya, center ng kultura, at center ng ng population. Kumpara mo sabihin nila, yung katabi nilang bansa right here, Mexico, isa lang yung clustered yung mga ilaw sa isang lugar. Isang yung core nila, hindi sila multi-core, isa lang yung core nila around Mexico City. At apart from that, pwede mo din naman tingnan yung population density kung gusto mo sa data para malaman mo yung core ng isang bansa. Sabihin natin sa Japan, kung ayaw mo tingnan yung ilaw, napapansin mo na ang population density ng Japan o mga population nila ay concentrated sa maliliit na syudad dito sa Tokyo, sa Nagoya, sa Osaka. Ganun din sa South Korea na concentrated sila sa Seoul. Sa China naman, concentrated sila sa area na to at walang katao-tao dito. So, ito yung periphery. At bakit sila concentrated sa ganito? Bakit sila nagsisiksikan? Well, pabalikan nga natin dahil sa geography. So, kung pupunta tayo sa Japan, sana all ako punta sa Japan, punta tayo sa Japan, pansin mo, kung ilalapat mo, itong areas na maraming tao, ito lang yung nag-iisang areas na flat yung lugar. Ang mga areas na kulay puti, coincidentally, sila yung mga lugar ng highlands o yung medyo kabundukan. Walang gustong tumira sa kabundukan. Paano ka magsasaka doon? Paano ka magtatanim ng bigas sa kabundukan? So, kaya nagiging parang densely populated yung core area since yun yung the best area for settlement. Kaya din sa South Korea o yung core area nito, ito diba, itong Seoul area. Kaya nakatira dito yung mga tao kasi ayaw nila tumira dito sa kabundukan. Di sila makapagtanim ng bigas dyan. At yun din sa China, ayaw nila tumira dito sa desierto. Kaya nagsisikat sila sa arable land kung saan maganda yung agricultural output at flat lands, mas madali gumawa ng bahay. So, yun na yun. That's my guide kung paano malaman asan yung core ng isang bansa. So, to summarize, pwede mo tingnan yung population density. Kung gusto mong astig, tingnan mo yung mga ilaw-ilaw. Or pwede mong tingnan na lang sa Google Maps. Kasi malalaman mo asan yung core areas, asan ba yung flatlands. Kasi kadalasan ng core areas, yun yung flatlands. So, maraming salamat. And thank you guys. So, that was the end of my presentation. Tagang salamat. I hope na may natutunan sa akong presentation. Thank you!